Hey there, friends. Today I'd like to have a conversation about the intersection of two subjects that are really important to me. One is the teaching and development of children, and two, woodworking. So that brings up the question, to Sloyd or not to Sloyd? Let's talk about it. I had heard the term Sloyd many times over the years, but I always associated it more with carving or whittling than anything else. And that's primarily because of advertisements I saw for Sloyd knives and things like that. But to say my understanding of Sloyd was incomplete is a vast understatement. Turns out Sloyd is an idea that you can help children develop a lot of critical thinking skills and talents by getting them to work with their hands. And while Sloyd woodworking is probably the most common of all the Sloyd techniques, Sloyd really stands for handicraft or working with the hands. So it can be applied to any of the arts. And it's really centered on the perspective of the child. How does the child perceive the work, and how does what are the interests of the child and things like that. So I've been reading a couple of books by a gentleman named Otto Salomon from the late 1800s. The books he wrote in particular were in the 1890s, the Teacher's Handbook for Sloyd and the Theory of Sloyd Education, where he talks about how he developed his methodology and really what it applies to. So today, in particular, I want to talk about guiding principles of the Sloyd education. All right, as we go through these principles, I'd really like to know what you think about this. I honestly want this to be a conversation. I am just learning this. I find it fascinating, but I am just learning. So if you have experience teaching and working with children, then I would love to hear about that and what you work. If you have experience directly in Sloyd, that would be very interesting to hear already. So as I've talked about my background a little bit before, and I've worked with children for many, many years, but always in an informal and volunteer type capacity. Started when I was in college, working with the Boy Scouts and being a camp counselor. Did that for quite a few years. And then when my son was born, worked as a cub master, den leader, assistant scoutmaster, all that stuff while he was in Scouts. Have been active in teaching Sunday school for many years, working primarily with the third, fourth, fifth grade range. Teaching kids in Sunday school with my wife. So I've really enjoyed that. Of course, woodworking, that's a passion of mine. So the way these two can intersect is, again, I find this very fascinating, where teaching children about woodworking. All right, let's dive into the guiding principles now. All right, principle number one is to focus on one craft. While Otto Salomon, his primary focus was woodworking, and that's my primary focus or my primary interest, he was careful to point out that Sloyd is not woodworking, and what we can learn from it can apply to any of the handicrafts. But his point was that while you don't need to be an absolute expert at your craft, you do have to know enough to be able to teach the children. And it's very hard to do that if you are an expert or if you're trying to teach multiple Sloyd crafts. So his principle number one is to concentrate on one form of Sloyd, and his chosen form was woodworking. He did say that woodworking tended to resonate better with the children. Of course, this is in the 1890s in Sweden, so woodworking was a major activity in that environment. But his point was You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to focus on one craft in the Sloyd. All right, principle number 2 is that the education really should drive from the making of useful objects. And as we get into some of the other the aims and practices of Sloyd, I think this becomes a little bit more evident. But children, in particular, you need to keep their attention, and you do that by making things, particularly things that they can use immediately. And it's things that are of interest to the child or to the family. So you don't want to focus on a bunch of exercises or just making of things that can't be used. Really want to focus on the ability or the interest of the child by making things that they can take home and use right away. The skills that they learn, they should be able to pick these skills up while they are making their useful objects. And they are actually now learning a little bit more intrinsically rather than just doing repetitive exercises. I find that in my own work as well. Whenever I'm picking up a new skill, I very rarely practice that new skill on scrap wood or anything else. I want to get in and make something. And usually the first couple times I make it's garbage, goes into scrap bin, but that's okay. So I think there's a lot of merit to this idea of having the children work on specific items that they're going to be able to use and helping them learn skills through that particular method. All right, principle number 3 is that this is really an educational method. It is not to be used to teach a craft or a trade. It is not to be used to prepare the child for gainful employment. It is to help them develop their entire system, if you will, their entire learning process by incorporating the use of handwork into educational studies. And this is why back there in Sweden, the Sloyd was actually accomplished at the school itself. But it should be a complement to the educational system, not separate from that. And therefore, it should follow a methodology similar to what is followed in the classroom. So it should be orderly and it should be methodical, but focusing on action and the use of hands as opposed to just strictly the use of brain. And I've read a few studies here recently that by incorporating, let me clarify that. I haven't actually read the studies. I've read summaries of studies that have said by using the hands, a child is much more likely to develop the skills that are needed to excel in mathematics, science, engineering, and things like that. And so there's actually been a shift recently from having STEM education, science, technology, education, and mathematics, to STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And when I first saw that, when I first started hearing that, I'm like, why are we focusing on arts when engineering and technology is really where it's at? But now it's starting to become clear to me that by incorporating artistic endeavors into the education system, it actually helps those children develop the skills to excel in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All right, principle number 4 is one that kind of caught me by surprise a little bit. I like it. And as I think about it, it does seem to make a lot of sense. And this principle is that the teacher, or that it's more important to be a teacher than it is to be an expert artisan. In fact, the principle is worded that the instructor should be teachers, not artisans. The idea is, again, we're trying to teach the children to be as a whole, and not focusing so much on the actual output of the work. There's a quote I read in the book that I just find fascinating, and I call it the big idea here. The big idea is that for a carpenter, and you can apply this to all of the artists and craftspeople, that the value of their work is in the item that they produce, because they're going to sell that item, or somebody's going to pay for it. So the value of the artisan's work is the work itself. The value of a child's work is in the child, because the child is going to learn the skills and take those skills with them. So it is not the output of the child's work. It is the child itself that is valuable in the Sloyd education. And that's an idea that I find remarkable. That it certainly resonates with me, that this is all about teaching and helping children develop. So the idea that just about anyone can teach Sloyd is, again, that just it's starting to make a lot of sense. Now, you can't be a complete novice. You have to have the basic skills, but your ability to teach children is more important than the skills that you have in the Sloyd craft itself. I love that concept. So this is one that I mean, particularly, I would love to hear what everybody else thinks about this. All right, principle number 5 is that the education in Sloyd should be voluntary, and it should be based on the individual. So as I'm reading a little bit about the Sloyd methodology, it's not to be set up as a true classroom instruction, even though it occurs in a classroom type environment. They call it the Sloyd room. While it occurs in the classroom environment, it does not follow the model of a traditional class, and it's about individual learning, not about memorization and things like that, which means the children are going to progress at different levels. They're going to progress at different speeds. They're going to have different outcomes, and all of that is okay. That it's based on what the child is capable of doing. And again, this is really starting to resonate here. So just an interesting thing, and I think this might make it, if you strictly follow the rule that it is to be voluntary and based on the individual, how does that play into a school environment? Because if you're incorporating Sloyd into a classroom, a true class environment, that means it's going to be compulsory for all children to participate, right? I don't know. I don't know how that works, but I do know that for something such as woodworking, if a child's not interested in it, not only can it be unproductive, it can be dangerous, because we do need to keep a good focus on the tools. even though in traditional Sloyd you're using hand tools, you're not using power tools. So that does minimize the risk there. But even a sharp chisel or a sharp saw can cause some pretty significant injuries there. So principle number 5, voluntary and based on the individual. All right, principle number 6 is that Sloyd really needs to be suitable for physical development. Again, we have to remember that because we are not necessarily teaching a craft or teaching a skill set, we are teaching the child to develop a full set of skills, including dexterity and physical strength and things like that. So even though in the 1890s industrialization was starting to occur in Sweden at that time, they were really focusing on hand tools and the use of hand tools and keeping the project simple. But they were really focusing on the physical strength. So one of the things that I've heard lately through commentaries and people on the internet is a growing concern about our children being so connected to technology that by children learning to type, we're actually losing some of their cognitive skills because they're not associating the use of writing and taking physical notes and things like that. It's not stimulating the brain in the same way. Playing video games, yes, there's a lot of coordination that has to happen with joysticks or whatever you're using, buttons and things like that. But tapping a button is not the same as drawing a line or the same as sawing to a particular kerf line, something of that nature. So really, to be effective in Sloyd, you have to focus on the physical aspects of the development. All right. Now, principle number 7 is one I never would have thought of myself. Certainly, of course, a lot of this stuff I wouldn't have thought of anyway. But the association here just kind of escaped me. And this principle says that drawing and Sloyd are to be taught together. And as we look at it, as we get into deeper later on, we see that in the outline of the course, a model is presented to the child. The child is expected to sketch it, and then the child is expected to produce that model using the different exercises and tools that are in Sloyd. But they wanted to make a connection of the concrete to the abstract. So you want it to be able to go from a physical product to a more abstract thought, and actually you're guiding the children then to move from just being able to reproduce a physical item to being able to create their own item. So it's a guided learning, moving from the concrete to the truly abstract, and from reproduction into creativity. So this is one that I really had no thoughts on prior to reading this in the book. So again, another interesting idea. So that wraps us up for the introduction to Sloyd and the theory of Sloyd education by Otto Salomon. In other videos, we're going to get into more details about the aims of Sloyd and the methodology of Sloyd. But I really want to get everyone's thoughts about, is this something that is applicable to today and of course the proliferation of technology at earlier and early ages for our children, and does the introduction of Sloyd craft, such as woodworking, really benefit the younger children? And is there a place for this in our society today? Getting Sloyd education going in a true school setting is complicated at best, highly unlikely due to funding and things like that. But I'm kind of wondering if there's not an opportunity to engage younger would-be craftspeople and getting them started in this craft of woodworking at a younger age. So let me know what your thoughts are. Drop a comment down below, and I do read them all and respond to them. And I'd like to really know what everybody else thinks about this. All right, so that's going to do it for today. Take care. God bless.